if you hold it.
Leningrad. Parle-moi, Musky Mule.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Q-Man channel. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Today, we will be discussing the movie xXx Return of Xander Cage 2017. The film kicks off with a jaw-dropping sequence, a highly intense, almost reckless skydiving stunt orchestrated by none other than Xander Cage himself. This isn't just some casual freefall, it's a deliberate provocation, a middle finger to the established order, showcasing the kind of adrenaline junkie individualism that made him a legend in the first place. Xander, who had supposedly retired and was living a quiet life in the Dominican Republic, teaching extreme sports to the local community, is quickly pulled back into the fray. The catalyst for his return is a covert mission concerning a dangerous satellite weapon known as Pandora's Box. This device, capable of causing catastrophic global disruption by hacking into military satellites, falls into the wrong hands when it's stolen by a highly skilled operative named Shang, a former associate of Xander's, driven by his own sense of justice and perhaps a bit of resentment toward the global powers that shunned him. Jane Zhang, a sharp, ambitious operative from the NSA, realizes that the only people capable of tracking down Xiang and neutralizing Pandora's Box are those operating outside the conventional lines of the law and military protocol. People like Xander Cage. She finds him, not through official channels, but by seeking him out in his remote paradise. Xander, initially hesitant, agrees to come back, but on his terms, demanding complete autonomy. This immediately sets the tone. He's not a soldier taking orders. He's a specialist being recruited. Xander assembles his own team, a collection of global misfits whose talents mirror his own eclectic approach to espionage. There's Tennyson, a tech wizard whose specialty lies in hacking and digital infiltration. Hawk, a former military sharpshooter with a knack for precision and a somewhat volatile temperament. And Adele Wolf, a tough, uncompromising operative whose background suggests intense special forces training, adding a necessary dose of grit to the group. Their dynamic is immediately contentious, as they represent different worlds. Xander's street-smart, improvisational style clashes with the more rigid, high-level training of someone like Wolf. The pursuit takes them across continents, from the bustling streets of Shanghai to the snowy peaks of remote mountains. Xiang and his crew are equally capable, presenting formidable opposition. The action sequences are less about precise military maneuvers and more about spectacular physics-defying stunts. Think high-speed chases involving motorcycles weaving through dense urban traffic and snowboarding down mountainsides while under heavy fire. This level of spectacle is Xander's signature, a direct nod to the early 2000s action cinema ethos he helped define, prioritizing style and outrageous execution over gritty realism. As the plot thickens, we learn that Xiang isn't entirely the villain he appears to be. His motivations are rooted in revenge against a corrupt official, Darius Stone, a figure from Xander's past who has now risen to a position of significant power within global security. Stone is revealed to be the true orchestrator, manipulating events to gain ultimate control using Pandora's box. This shift in allegiance, this classic trope of the misunderstood antagonist becoming an uneasy ally, forces Xander and his team to reevaluate everyone they are fighting. The climax involves a desperate infiltration of Stone's heavily fortified base. It's a multi-layered assault requiring everyone's unique skills. Tennyson cracking the digital defenses, Hawk providing overwatch, and Xander and Wolf executing a close-quarters breach. The confrontation with Stone is personal, bringing Xander face-to-face with the consequences of his past life, and the realization that true heroism often means trusting the outcasts. In the end, Pandora's box is secured, Stone is neutralized, and the team manages to escape, leaving behind a trail of spectacular chaos. The film closes not with Xander settling down, but with him embracing his role as the world's reluctant, rule-breaking guardian. The final scenes suggest that the world will always need the extreme measures that only someone like Xander Cage can deliver, setting the stage for yet another unpredictable venture. The initial plunge from the stratosphere, that glorious, terrifying freefall that opens the narrative, isn't merely an introduction to Xander Cage, it's a declaration of his ethos. This is a man who finds his comfort zone in the zone of maximum danger, a philosophy honed over years of defying gravity and authority alike. His supposed retirement in the Dominican Republic, teaching local kids how to navigate the world with an X Games mentality, felt almost too neat, a brief pause before the inevitable crescendo of chaos he thrives in. When Jane Zhang, the NSA handler whose sharp efficiency contrasts starkly with Xander's bohemian swagger, tracks him down, there's a palpable tension. Zhang represents the very establishment Xander has always sidestepped, yet her desperation is genuine. She needs the unorthodox, the specialist who operates on intuition rather than regulation, and Xander, though wary of being re-ensnared, recognizes the gravity of Pandora's box. It's not just a weapon, it's a threat to the very chaos he believes should be left unregulated by the suits in government offices. His acceptance is less about patriotism and more about a duty to the thrill and the balance of power. The power to mess things up falling into the wrong, too powerful hands. Assembling his crew is like curating a gallery of exceptional screw-ups. Tennyson, the hacker, is the nervous energy behind the screen, capable of weaving digital illusions that fool the most advanced surveillance systems, a true successor to the cyber warriors of previous generations, albeit with more flair. Hawk, the marksman, brings a lethal focus, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, a testament to the relentless discipline required to survive high-stakes military operations before he too likely chafed under the red tape. Then there's Adele Wolf. She is an iceberg of capability, cold, powerful, and utterly professional. Her presence immediately challenges Xander's laid-back command style. She respects results, not reputation, and their early friction is delicious. She represents the trained soldier's skepticism toward the self-made legend. The global chase sequences are pure, unadulterated spectacle, an evolution of the action set pieces that defined this franchise. When they are careening through an Asian metropolis on motorcycles, dodging traffic and leaping between buildings, it's not realism they are aiming for. It's a tribute to the sheer possibility of action cinema. Xander drives not just to escape, but to orchestrate the perfect moment of impossible evasion, a testament to his almost superhuman reflexes honed by a lifetime of flirting with disaster. The revelation about Xiang's true motives, that he is acting against Darius Stone, the very man who benefited from Xander's earlier high-profile escapades, adds a layer of necessary complexity. Stone is the embodiment of institutional hypocrisy, a man who uses security as a mask for tyranny. This moral gray area is where Xander, the ultimate outsider, truly excels. He doesn't care about the chain of command. He cares about fixing the immediate, catastrophic problem. The shifting alliances feel earned, born from shared enmity toward a greater, more centralized threat. The final assault is a ballet of coordinated mayhem. Tennyson's digital mastery creates the necessary blind spots, allowing Xander and Wolf finally moving in synchronized, grudging harmony to breach the defenses. Wolf's efficiency complements Xander's improvisational genius perfectly. She handles the close-quarters threats with brutal precision, while Xander looks for the theatrical, yet effective, solution. The confrontation with Stone is less a fistfight and more a battle of ideologies, the freedom of the fringe versus the suffocating control of the center. When Pandora's box is neutralized, it's not just a technical victory. It's a reaffirmation that the world needs people who are willing to jump out of a plane without a guaranteed plan. Because sometimes, the only way to save order is through beautiful, calculated chaos. Xander walks away, not towards a medal, but towards the horizon, knowing that the global equilibrium is fragile and requires constant, reckless maintenance by the very type of person the system perpetually tries to sideline. The air crackled with Xander's barely contained energy, even when he was merely speaking to Jane Zhang. It wasn't just the extreme sports that fueled him. It was the innate distrust of anything too clean or too controlled. He carries the weight of his legendary status lightly, yet it defines every move. The casual confidence that suggests he has already calculated 30 different ways to survive the current situation and the inevitable fallout. His recruitment of the team is less about building a conventional squad and more about assembling a set of highly specialized tools he knows how to wield best, precisely because they are all broken in similar, spectacular ways. Wolf remains the fascinating friction point. She embodies the rigid discipline Xander actively rejects. You can sense her internal struggle. Her training screams that Cage is reckless, yet his results are undeniable. Her skepticism is a necessary anchor, preventing Xander's genius from dissolving entirely into pure stunt work. She watches him, processing his methods, the way he uses a passing delivery truck as a ramp, the sheer audacity of his timing, and slowly, grudgingly, begins to adapt her military precision to match his improvisation. It's a non-verbal acknowledgement that in this specific impossible scenario, the rulebook is obsolete. The sequences of high-speed movement across hostile terrain aren't just visually impressive, they are character studies in motion. Watching Hawk operate his weaponry, there's an almost meditative stillness amidst the carnage, reflecting years spent mastering the art of the perfect shot, a stark contrast to Tennyson, who looks perpetually on the verge of a panic attack while simultaneously navigating a labyrinth of firewalls. Tennyson's digital brilliance is his armor, allowing him to feel powerful behind a screen when the physical world, the world Xander dominates, is overwhelmingly threatening. Darius Stone's emergence as the true puppet master provides the necessary emotional core for the finale. He is the representation of everything Xander despises: power attained through bureaucratic maneuvering and self-serving definitions of security. When Xander confronts him, it's not just about disarming a weapon. It's a showdown between authentic, earned individualism and suffocating institutionalized authority. Xander fights not just for the world, but for the right to live on the margins, to define one's own parameters of existence. The climax is beautifully messy. It's a testament to Xander's ability to inspire loyalty in the disaffected. They win because they are unpredictable. The final moments, after the dust settles, and the global satellites are safe from Stone's centralized control, show Xander smiling that familiar, slightly manic grin. He hasn't reformed. He's simply postponed his next necessary act of rebellion. The return to the Dominican Republic is not a final destination, but merely a comfortable pit stop, a brief moment of recharging before the next inevitable call comes for the only man insane enough to answer it. He is the necessary antidote to institutional complacency, the wild card that keeps the powers that be looking over their shoulders. The immediate aftermath of dismantling Stone's operation leaves a strange void. It's the quiet right after the explosion, a moment of uncomfortable stillness where the adrenaline begins to recede, leaving behind the lingering scent of ozone and burnt rubber. For Xander and his newly forged, intensely temporary family, the victory feels less like a triumphant close and more like the successful navigation of one particularly nasty storm. They haven't been given medals. They've been given a warning. The world remains just as messy, just as ripe for exploitation. Only now a few more powerful people know exactly who Xander Cage is and what he can do. This fragile equilibrium doesn't last long, as is the nature of a life lived on the extreme edge. The world, having just witnessed the near catastrophe of Pandora's box, begins to look for scapegoats and, more pressingly, new threats that require the application of equally unconventional force. It's the system's perpetual paradox. It condemns Xander's methods while simultaneously recognizing that only those methods can solve the messes the system itself creates. The recruitment methods used by Jane Zhang have seemingly established a new, unofficial pipeline, a backdoor into the shadows that only Xander can operate. The lingering tension between Xander and Wolf begins to transform. The initial professional hostility morphs into a grudging respect, the kind forged only in shared life-or-death moments where hesitation meant termination. Wolf starts to see the inherent morality beneath Xander's recklessness. He never fights for territory or ideology, only for survival and the preservation of a certain kind of freedom. This evolution sees her beginning to loosen her own rigid posture, perhaps even admitting, internally, that a perfectly executed snowboard jump under fire carries a certain undeniable elegance that military drills often lack. Tennyson, emboldened by successfully breaching Stone's impenetrable digital fortress, starts pushing the boundaries of his own coding ethics. He begins seeing the world not as fixed reality, but as infinitely malleable lines of code, tempting him to explore the darker, more lucrative possibilities of his skills now that the immediate danger has passed. His journey is internal, the struggle between the legitimate use of his genius and the siren call of high-level, untraceable digital anarchy. As the narrative pivots toward the next inevitable crisis, the feeling is one of persistent recruitment, not retirement. Xander is now too valuable and too dangerous to be left unsupervised. He understands this inherently. The quiet life in the tropics was a necessary illusion, a way to recharge the batteries, but the world's demand for the impossible is a relentless engine. The film suggests that Xander Cage has evolved from a rogue operative into a necessary institution, an unpredictable force of nature reluctantly tasked with policing the shadows that conventional intelligence agencies dare not touch. The true climax isn't the defeat of Stone, but the acceptance that this life of perpetual, spectacular confrontation is the only life he has left, ensuring that whenever global stakes are raised impossibly high, the call will always go out to the man who enjoys the free fall. The quiet that descends after the fall of Darius Stone is deceptive, feeling less like peace and more like the held breath before the next tidal wave. Xander finds the silence profoundly unsettling. It strips away the immediate, visceral focus that keeps his mind sharp and his reflexes honed. He retreats to the familiar rhythms of the Dominican Republic, but the island paradise now feels like a temporary stage set, waiting for the next blockbuster scene to be called. His interactions are marked by a subtle restlessness. The adrenaline junkie, temporarily deprived of his necessary fix, begins to chafe against the mundane. Jane Zhang's continued presence, even in unofficial capacity, underscores the reality. Xander has become the world's most effective, yet least controllable, emergency response system. There is a palpable tension in their communications, a dance between her need for established protocol and his absolute refusal to adhere to it. She understands that to truly manage him, she must grant him the illusion of autonomy, a necessary concession that often means accepting collateral damage in exchange for world-saving results. The dynamic with Adele Wolfe deepens into a fascinating study of contrasting competencies. Wolfe, having survived the crucible of the final mission, starts viewing Xander's unorthodox movements not as recklessness, but as a hyper-efficient form of kinetic problem-solving. Her emotions remain guarded, channeled entirely into the perfection of her own physical capabilities. But there are subtle shifts. A slight easing of the jaw when Xander pulls off an impossible save. A tacit nod of approval when his chaotic plan somehow aligns perfectly with the tactical necessity. She's learning that Xander doesn't ignore the rules because he's stupid. He ignores them because he sees rules as merely suggestions crafted by less daring minds. Tennyson, meanwhile, tastes the sweet nectar of true digital impunity. Having successfully navigated the high-stakes environment against Stone, he's intoxicated by the sheer power of his own access. He begins to tinker, pushing minor digital boundaries just to feel the thrill of untouchability. This signals a potential future conflict. The group's cohesion relies on shared moral lines, and Tennyson is beginning to wander dangerously close to the blurry edges of cyber exploitation. Xander, who respects boundaries concerning people but not institutions, must eventually address the internal threat posed by his own tech experts' expanding ego. The unspoken understanding among the team is that their victory has only made them bigger targets for those who prefer their threats predictable. Xander is no longer just an athlete. He is now the known quantity capable of neutralizing the unknown. This realization solidifies his role not as a retired legend returning for one last hurrah, but as the reluctant foundation upon which a new shadow defense network is being silently built, one recruited misfit at a time. The closing sentiment isn't relief, but a quiet acknowledgement that the only constant in Xander Cage's life is the certainty of the next impossible mission arriving before the last one has fully faded from the headlines. The shadows, it turns out, never truly dissipate. They merely shift their focus. Xander's return to his tropical anonymity is a performance, a necessary act to lull the official world into a false sense of security. He moves through his days with an almost forced calm, but his eyes, perpetually scanning the horizon, betray the fact that he is waiting for the next signal flare in the darkness. The very air in the Dominican Republic feels too still, too predictable, a stark contrast to the controlled pandemonium he orchestrates when active. The relationship developing between Xander and Wolfe matures into a fascinating study of synergy born from conflict. Wolfe's evolution is subtle but profound. She begins to integrate Xander's philosophy of environmental dominance, using terrain, unexpected angles, and sheer audacity into her own rigorously trained skill set. There's a moment, perhaps over shared tactical planning in a dimly lit room, where she doesn't argue a point, but instead offers a modification to one of Xander's outrageous proposals, a sign that she has moved beyond mere obedience to genuine collaboration. Her initial coldness melts into an ironclad loyalty, the kind that only comes from knowing someone has your back when the odds are definitively stacked against survival. Tennyson's quiet digital exploration becomes an increasing source of low-level friction. He's not actively malicious, but he's drunk on capability. He starts developing ghost programs, tools of exquisite digital infiltration that he justifies as insurance or contingency planning. Xander senses this creeping moral compromise. While Xander burns bridges with explosives and stunts, Tennyson risks burning the world down with lines of code. This internal threat is perhaps more insidious than any external enemy because it challenges the core trust that holds the team together, the shared understanding that they fight for a relatively clean outcome despite their messy methods. Jane Zhang, ever the pragmatist, recognizes the team's inherent instability and begins subtly managing their external pressures, effectively becoming their unofficial shield against the very governments they save. Her appreciation for Xander deepens into something akin to respect for an elemental force. She knows you don't control a hurricane, you merely try to guide its path away from population centers. She accepts that Xander's definition of mission accomplished often involves leaving a magnificent trail of chaos that requires significant cleanup, but crucially, that cleanup is now accepted as the cost of neutralizing a major threat. The realization dawns that the retirement story was a necessary fiction for the sake of distraction. Xander Cage is now defined by his perpetual availability in the face of unprecedented danger. He understands his value is tethered to his refusal to be institutionalized. The film leaves the audience with the distinct impression that the world is not safer because Xander Cage exists. The world is safer because Xander Cage is willing to operate in the spaces where safety protocols cease to apply. He is the necessary explosion that clears the fog, always ready to take the next leap into the unknown, knowing that for him, the impact is just another form of landing. The anticipation for the next crisis becomes almost a character in itself. It hangs in the air around Xander like the scent of gunpowder that never quite washes out of his gear. The world, having been shown its near-fatal vulnerability through Pandora's box, begins exhibiting a nervous energy, a low-frequency hum of paranoia that Xander, ironically, finds comforting. It confirms his worldview. Absolute control breeds absolute disaster, and freedom, even the dangerous freedom of the extreme operative, is the only true safeguard. Xander's continued presence on the global periphery sparks curiosity in new, darker corners of international espionage. He hasn't just made allies. He's drawn attention from those who see his independent strength not as a solution, but as a weakness to be exploited or eliminated. The narrative shifts subtly from hunting a specific villain to actively navigating a landscape increasingly saturated with shadowy organizations vying for the technological and tactical advantage Xander's team represents. He is now the prize, the ultimate asset, and consequently, the primary target for assimilation or destruction. The dynamic with Wolf continues its trajectory toward complete mutual reliance. Her disciplined focus now anticipates Xander's flair for the dramatic. She doesn't just react to his stunts, she positions herself ahead of them, ensuring the escape route is covered before he even executes the impossible maneuver. This synthesis of rigid training and pure instinct creates a seamless fighting unit, a partnership that communicates more through shared glances across a battlefield than through lengthy planning sessions. It's the quiet acknowledgement that in the world they inhabit, perfection is improvisation at high speed. Tennyson's secret coding activities finally necessitate confrontation, not with an external force, but within the team itself. Xander handles it not with an angry tirade, but with a quiet, devastating clarity. He confronts Tennyson not about the illegality of the hacks, but the threat to their trust. For Xander, the one unbreakable rule is loyalty to the operational bubble they've created. Tennyson, chastened by the gravity of Xander's quiet disapproval, far more effective than any shouting, sees the arrogance in his digital overreach. He pulls back, understanding that his power must serve their shared purpose, not his burgeoning ego. This resolution reaffirms the team's moral compass, albeit one calibrated far from mainstream legality. The overarching theme solidifies: Xander Cage is the necessary anomaly. He thrives where the system breaks down, and the system is perpetually breaking down. The film ends not with a final victory or a neat retirement package, but with Xander receiving a cryptic notification on a burner phone, a signal that the next global imbalance requires the unique application of controlled catastrophe. He accepts it without hesitation, the familiar glint of excitement returning to his eyes. He doesn't seek chaos, but he is undeniably the world's most effective agent of controlled combustion, destined to ride the edge indefinitely. The encrypted message that interrupts Xander's manufactured tranquility is elegantly simple, designed to bypass all conventional security measures, a hallmark of the sophisticated, often clandestine network that now depends on his existence. It carries no explicit threat, only a coordinate and a time, a challenge dressed as an appointment. This is the reality of his life now. The world doesn't send formal requests. It sends breadcrumbs into the abyss, trusting that the man who embraces the abyss will follow. Xander's immediate preparations are almost ritualistic, a contrast to the chaos he's about to unleash. He doesn't consult Zhang, he simply prepares for departure. This autonomy infuriates the official channels, but is their silent guarantee of success. Wolf is already packing, her kit meticulously organized, her expression unreadable but intensely focused. She understands the language of these cryptic summons. They usually mean one of two things: a trap of incredible complexity, or a threat so large it necessitates breaking every existing protocol. Her loyalty now runs deeper than duty. It's a commitment to shared survival against overwhelming odds. The evolution of the team dynamic under this pressure is telling. Hawk, usually stoic, shows a flicker of genuine concern for Tennyson, recognizing the young hacker's vulnerability to the seduction of unchecked digital power. This protective instinct speaks volumes about the pseudo-family unit they've become, a collection of experts who found belonging precisely because the established world deemed them too volatile or too unconventional. They are bound by the scars of past missions and the shared understanding that their combined, specialized insanity is the world's last line of defense. As they move toward the rendezvous point, likely a location chosen for its logistical nightmare factor, a submerged platform, a drifting freighter, or perhaps the interior of a shifting weather system, the narrative emphasizes Xander's internal landscape. He is keenly aware that each mission chips away at his own humanity, replacing it with legend. Yet the thrill remains undiluted. He isn't fighting against aging or fading reflexes. He's fighting against the creeping notion that he might one day be conventionalized or contained. That fear, the fear of boredom, of regulation, is a greater motivator than any abstract concept of saving the world. The underlying theme solidifies as they engage the threat implied by the coordinates. The forces Xander fights are always projections of centralized power attempting to consolidate control through technology, information, or overwhelming force. Xander Cage, the iconoclast, is the living embodiment of decentralized resistance. His very existence validates the idea that true security lies not in impenetrable walls, but in the unpredictable brilliance of those willing to dismantle those walls from the outside. The film concludes not with a final answer, but with the certainty of perpetual engagement, leaving Xander exactly where he belongs, in exhilarating motion, miles ahead of the safety net the rest of the world desperately tries to construct. The silent summons felt less like an invitation and more like the planet recalibrating itself around a necessary catalyst. Xander, absorbing the data from the cryptic message, felt the familiar, almost pleasurable tightening in his chest. Retirement was a concept for those who believed problems could be permanently solved. Xander knew problems were merely dormant, waiting for the right conditions to metastasize. His immediate focus shifted to Wolf, who was already moving with an efficiency that bordered on prescience. Her packing was a minimalist study in preparedness, every item serving multiple potential functions, a direct translation of her disciplined mind into material form. She didn't need to ask where they were going. She only needed to know the expected level of resistance. The concern Hawk displayed for Tennyson was a quiet testament to the team's evolving social fabric. Hawk, who specialized in the tangible finality of precision weaponry, saw in Tennyson the danger of invisible warfare, a threat that couldn't be shot down. He offered Tennyson pragmatic advice, grounded in physical survival, a subtle anchor against the hackers' increasing immersion in the purely digital realm. This protective vigilance highlighted their reliance on each other's unique vulnerabilities. They were effective because they were constantly compensating for the edges where their teammates were weakest or most tempted. As they mobilized, leaving the gentle, humid air of the Caribbean behind, the narrative emphasized Xander's internal assessment of his legendary status. He was acutely aware that his reputation preceded him. It was both his greatest asset and the primary liability he constantly had to outrun. He wasn't trying to achieve a clean victory. He was trying to achieve an improbable one, ensuring that the methods used were so extreme that the establishment would be hesitant to call upon him again soon. Yet, he knew that call would come, because the solutions he provided were always faster and more decisive than the bureaucratic nightmares he sought to avoid. The destination, when finally revealed through a rapid decryption by Tennyson, who was keeping his more self-serving projects temporarily shelved, was indeed designed to induce maximum systemic failure. A remote, volatile environment that favored adaptability over firepower. It was a space where conventional military doctrine would lead to immediate failure, requiring the very brand of improvisational high-stakes ballet that Xander choreographed. The film's final emotional beat resonated not in the action sequence itself, but in the mutual acknowledgement among the team members as they prepared for the plunge into the next conflict. There was no shared declaration of patriotism, only a grim understanding of their shared fate. They were the essential pollutants, the necessary virus in the system designed to combat other, more malignant infections. Xander smiled, not with simple joy, but with the fierce satisfaction of a man who has finally found his true calling in perpetual motion. Understanding that his legacy wouldn't be built on monuments, but on the spectacular near misses that kept the world spinning safely on its precarious axis for another season. The transit to the designated drop zone was itself a masterclass in operational opacity, utilizing modes of transport that intentionally baffled satellite tracking and conventional intelligence sweeps. Xander insisted on traveling light, but his team's gear told the story of their evolution. They carried not just weaponry, but the tools of technological disruption and survival in environments where infrastructure simply did not exist. Wolf monitored the perimeter with an unnerving stillness, her profile a study in lethal readiness, while Tennyson obsessively ran diagnostics on encrypted communication channels, ensuring their conversation remained purely within their self-contained bubble, safe from the prying ears of the very agencies that occasionally employed them. The next threat materialized as an organization dedicated not to acquiring a single weapon, but to achieving absolute informational dominance over the burgeoning field of near-Earth satellite defense. A digital leviathan threatening to weaponize global weather patterns and communication grids simultaneously. This antagonist was highly elusive, led by a shadowy figure known only through their digital footprint. A master manipulator who viewed Xander Cage as the ultimate unpredictable variable that needed to be neutralized before he could disrupt their carefully laid algorithmic dominance. Xander's response was characteristically visceral. He bypassed strategic planning in favor of immediate kinetic engagement against the threat's known physical relay points, using the initial strikes as bait. This was a calculated risk designed to draw the digital mastermind into a physical confrontation, forcing them to divert resources from the ethereal realm of code to the messy reality of physical defense, which was Xander's native territory. The ensuing sequence involved simultaneous ground infiltration and aerial assault, demanding perfect timing. Hawk provided phenomenal overwatch from an impossible elevation, his shots not just eliminating threats but subtly shaping the battlefield to favor Xander and Wolf's unorthodox entry vectors. Wolf, moving alongside Xander, was no longer merely covering him. She was anticipating his trajectory, creating pathways through hostile territory where none should exist. Their combat synergy had reached a point of near telepathic synchronization, a testament to shared experience under the highest duress. The final confrontation took place not in a secure bunker, but within the infrastructure itself, a massive automated communications hub located precariously on a remote, seismic fault line. Xander didn't engage the leader in a philosophical debate. He engaged the system. While Wolf neutralized the human security detail with brutal efficiency, Xander and Tennyson worked in tandem. Tennyson battling the leader's digital defenses in real time, while Xander physically overloaded the system's core processors with a precisely timed, high-yield electromagnetic pulse device. It was a solution that favored destruction over delicate neutralization, a testament to Xander's ongoing belief that sometimes the only way to clean up a digital mess is to violently sever its connection to the physical world. With the informational threat neutralized and the communication hub rendered inert, the team extracted under a curtain of manufactured electronic noise. The victory felt hollower than usual, however, because the true leader of the digital organization escaped, melting back into the ether, leaving behind only a calling card suggesting that this was merely a rehearsal. Xander looked at the receding horizon, realizing that his war wasn't against individual villains, but against the very concept of centralized, unchecked control, a battle that was infinite and constantly evolving. He had saved the world again, ensuring that the rules remained loose enough for him to operate, his next move already being calculated in the silence between heartbeats. The escape from the crippled communications hub was a testament to the team's honed desperation. They weren't extracting cleanly. They were fighting their way out of a localized apocalypse of their own making. As the seismic tremors intensified, exacerbated by the EMP blast, Xander found a grim amusement in the unfolding disaster. He wasn't just surviving, he was conducting an encore performance for an audience of collapsing architecture. Wolf, her face smeared with grime but her movements fluid, executed a perfect, controlled slide off a collapsing gantry, grabbing Tennyson mid-stumble. Tennyson, still wired from the intense digital battle, was pale but vibrating with a strange pride. He had fought a ghost and forced it to bleed tangible interference. The persistent threat, the digital ghost who orchestrated the whole debacle, represented a chilling new evolution of their adversaries. These new enemies weren't interested in territory or money. They sought systemic control, weaponizing the very fabric of global connectivity. This realization hit Xander with the force of a physical blow. His analog, adrenaline-fueled methods were becoming increasingly obsolete against foes who operated entirely in the abstract realm of data streams. He needed to adapt, not by abandoning his style, but by integrating Tennyson's mastery more deeply, turning their physical assaults into precise, necessary distractions for high-level cyber warfare. Hawk's role during the extraction solidified his standing as the pragmatic counterbalance to Xander's flamboyant risk-taking. From a secure, distant perch, his sniper fire wasn't random suppression. It was calculated engineering, creating temporary dead zones in security networks and timing environmental collapses to shield the extraction path. He wasn't just a shooter. He was the team's temporal architect, ensuring that the chaos Xander generated had a narrow window for successful egress. Jane Zhang's reaction to the near-disaster was predictably fraught with bureaucratic panic, quickly masked by efficiency. She deployed cleanup crews, specialists in plausible deniability, to scrub the event from official records, effectively burying the truth under layers of manufactured white noise. She knew the real truth. Xander Cage doesn't clean up messes. He causes bigger, necessary messes that overshadow the initial, more dangerous problem. Her continued support hinges on this uneasy bargain. She trades plausible deniability for global stability, knowing that if Xander ever decided to fight her system, no defense grid would hold. The return journey was subdued. The adrenaline high faded, replaced by the weighty knowledge that the digital mastermind was still out there, learning from their encounter. For Xander, this wasn't a defeat. It was crucial reconnaissance. He understood that the next engagement wouldn't be fought with motorcycles or explosives, but likely within the interconnected nervous system of global finance or defense satellites. He looked at his team, no longer seeing recruits, but specialists who had passed a brutal trial. They were now tethered by shared secrets and the grim commitment to fight an invisible war. The end of this mission was simply the beginning of preparing for the next, far more abstract battlefield, a reality Xander Cage embraced with the unwavering certainty of a man who finally understood that he wasn't just an extreme athlete. He was the necessary, unpredictable glitch in the matrix of modern global control. The silence following the destruction of the communications hub was thick with unspoken truths and the lingering scent of burnt circuitry, a scent Xander now associated with momentary victory. He stood on the extraction platform, the wind whipping his hair, not reveling in the spectacle, but dissecting the escape. The ease with which the digital phantom had anticipated their movements unnerved him more than any armed guard ever could. He recognized the intellectual arrogance of the enemy, an arrogance mirroring the very institutional hubris he'd always fought against, only this time it was encased in impenetrable code rather than tailored suits. Wolf stood slightly apart, her posture softening almost imperceptibly as she cleaned a microscopic shard of metal from her tactical vest. She finally voiced the unspoken concern, her tone flat but laced with respect. He played our reactions. He wasn't trying to stop the EMP. He was ensuring we couldn't trace his egress point through the resulting noise. This wasn't criticism. It was an analysis offered on equal footing, a signal that she was fully integrating his chaotic style with her tactical framework. Xander met her gaze, offering a rare, genuine nod of approval. The respect between them was hard-won, built on moments where one's gut feelings saved the other from absolute termination. Tennyson, temporarily humbled by the near-catastrophic feedback loop from the EMP, was nursing his hands, which still tingled from the intense interface. The experience had shaken his faith in his own digital untouchability. He looked pale, not from fear of capture, but from the raw exertion and the realization that his intellect alone wasn't enough. Xander clapped him hard on the shoulder, a gesture meant to ground him. Your ghosts need bodies to haunt, Tennyson. Bring them out into the light, our light. It was Xander's way of validating the necessity of their physical coordination. The digital war required a tangible anchor. Hawk, ever the sentinel, provided the most disturbing intelligence. He'd noticed unusual aerial surveillance patterns during their extraction, not standard military drones, but advanced, unmarked civilian craft exhibiting autonomous, learning algorithms. They're not looking for us yet, Hawk reported, his voice a low rumble over the comms. They're mapping the aftermath. They want to know how the system adapted to your signature disruption, Cage. This implied the enemy wasn't just fighting them. They were studying them, attempting to code a preventative measure against the Xander Cage anomaly. Zhang's communication was curt, delivered through a heavily scrambled burst. Containment successful. Immediate dispersal required. The next wave won't use satellites. They'll use infrastructure. Be fluid, Xander. The message confirmed Xander's worst fears. The fight was moving from high-stakes espionage to the fundamental underpinnings of civilization. As the team split ways, Hawk and Tennyson to disappear into the deep net, Wolf to secure a safe route for Xander, Xander felt the exhilaration of being hunted by something intelligent and adaptive. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was the primary threat vector to an emerging global surveillance state. His comfort zone wasn't just danger. It was the specific intersection where reckless human intuition clashed violently with suffocating algorithmic control. He looked back toward the ruins of the hub, a satisfied smirk playing on his lips. The game hadn't ended. It had just upgraded to a higher difficulty setting, and Xander Cage thrived in the impossible odds. The return of Xander Cage, as presented in the 2017 installment, feels less like a necessary continuation of a beloved, albeit campy franchise, and more like a desperate attempt to inject relevance back into a concept that had long since peaked. Vin Diesel, reprising the role that cemented his status as a purveyor of extreme sports meets espionage, steps back into the oversized leather jacket with the familiar, almost weary confidence of a seasoned action star. The narrative thrust centers on Cage being pulled out of self-imposed exile by the intelligence community, a trope so worn it's practically threadbare, to confront a new, nihilistic threat. What immediately strikes the viewer is the film's obsession with globalized, hyper-stylized action, almost deliberately contrasting with the grounded, albeit exaggerated aesthetic of the early 2000s originals. This Xander Cage is less the street-smart rebel and more a polished, reluctant superhero. Diesel's persona, heavily invested in the themes of family and loyalty established in the Fast and Furious saga, bleeds into this role, softening the rougher edges that initially made Cage an appealing anti-establishment figure. His motivations are less about adrenaline and more about protecting a chosen family, a thematic carryover that highlights the studio's overarching brand strategy rather than the specific needs of the XXX universe. The supporting cast is a deliberate assembly of international talent designed to reflect the film's supposed global scope. Ruby Rose, taking on the role of sharpshooter Adele Wolfe, brings a cool, almost robotic efficiency. Rose's on-screen persona, often characterized by intense physical presence and minimal emotional leakage, fits seamlessly into the mold of the elite operative. Her presence is functional, providing specialized skills to complement Cage's reckless bravado, though the character development remains strikingly thin, serving primarily as a visual and tactical counterpoint. The introduction of Donnie Yen as Xiang is perhaps the most compelling element, injecting a genuine martial arts pedigree into the proceedings. Yen, whose career trajectory showcases mastery in choreography and nuanced performance within action cinema, embodies a mirror image of Cage, a disciplined, highly skilled operative operating outside conventional lines. Their rivalry and eventual uneasy alliance provide the few moments where the action choreography transcends mere spectacle and approaches genuine kinetic artistry, drawing upon Yen's deep well of Hong Kong action cinema influences. The film's true antagonist, Xiang's operative Talon, played by a suitably severe Nina Dobrev, is less a character and more a plot device designed to facilitate exposition and trigger the main conflict. Dobrev, known for her work in television drama, struggles to ground the absurdities of the techno-terrorism plot, which involves stealing weaponized satellites, a concept so overtly ludicrous it requires absolute commitment from the performers, a commitment that is only partially present. The direction favors rapid cuts and weightless physics, hallmarks of contemporary big-budget action filmmaking that occasionally sabotage the very set pieces they aim to enhance. Sequences involving snowmobiles leaping between moving trucks or aerial maneuvers involving clandestine planes feel less like achievable stunts and more like video game cutscenes. This stylistic choice alienates the viewer from the practical dangers Cage supposedly faces, reducing the stakes to purely visual metrics. Ultimately, xXx, Return of Xander Cage functions as a product designed for immediate, disposable entertainment. It successfully revives the character by wrapping him in the visual language of Diesel's current brand identity, prioritizing international casting and high-octane, consequence-free destruction over the slightly more rebellious, punk energy of the original. It is a loud, colorful affirmation that while Xander Cage can return, capturing the spirit that initially propelled him into the mainstream proves a far more difficult mission. The film's inherent problem lies in its desperate need to justify Xander Cage's resurrection. The initial premise of the first film, where he was a dangerous wildcard forcibly conscripted by the NSA, possessed a kinetic tension derived from the clash of two opposing worlds. Here, Cage is essentially recruited by a reformed government agency, the xXx program itself, resurrected by Jane Zhang, played by the ever-reliable but underutilized Deepika Padukone. Padukone's portrayal of Zhang is that of a grounded professional navigating the chaos Xander inevitably generates. Her chemistry with Diesel is professional, lacking the barbed sarcasm that might have offered more friction to the plot's otherwise smooth, inevitable trajectory. Zhang serves as the film's conscience, constantly reminding Cage and the audience of the stakes, even as the action sequences consistently ignore any sense of actual peril. the characterization of Xander Cage himself undergoes a significant shift that betrays his origins. The original Cage, fueled by a rebellious streak against authority and a genuine love for extreme, often illegal activities, was inherently unpredictable. Diesel's Cage in 2017 is domesticated. He is a celebrated figure, almost a global brand ambassador for adrenaline. When he engages in his signature stunts, like surfing down a remote jungle waterfall or executing a motorcycle jump through a collapsing building, the audience is meant to cheer his defiance, yet the context feels manufactured. It feels less like an act of personal exhilaration and more like fulfilling a contractual obligation to perform feats that escalate beyond the realm of enjoyable absurdity into outright fantasy. This polished execution strips away the gritty, almost dangerous edge that made the early Xander captivating to a certain demographic, seeking anti-hero thrills. The recruitment montage, a familiar action movie staple, showcases the film's prioritization of diversity over depth. We meet Darius Stone, a military operative played by Michael Bussé, whose presence feels like a nod to continuity, without sufficient narrative justification for his current involvement. Then there is Tennyson Ten Roach, the tech specialist portrayed by Rory McCann. McCann, known for his imposing physicality and ability to convey silent menace, is reduced here to dispensing jargon and occasionally piloting drones. His character embodies the film's reliance on archetypes: the muscle, the brains, the rogue, the specialist, all assembled like components rather than integrated personalities. The emotional core, as intended by the screenwriters, is meant to rest on Xiang's tragic backstory and his pursuit of redemption, paralleling Cage's own path toward responsibility. Donnie Yen brings a quiet dignity to these scenes, using his expressive martial arts language to convey more feeling than the often stilted dialogue allows. His movements possess a weight and precision that momentarily grounds the film. When he fights, the scene slows down just enough for the audience to appreciate the technique, contrasting sharply with the manic, over-edited chaos that surrounds Diesel's action sequences. This dynamic, Yen's controlled power versus Diesel's kinetic sprawl, is the film's most successful element, a testament to Yen's status as a global action icon who demands respect for the craft of combat choreography. However, the film buckles under the weight of its own expansive ambition. By trying to be bigger than the previous entries, covering multiple continents, deploying satellite weaponry, and involving massive explosions, it loses the intimate, high-stakes personal conflict that usually drives better action thrillers. The climax, involving the infiltration of a heavily defended island base, feels less like a triumph of espionage and more like a meticulously planned video game-level completion. The lack of lasting consequence for the heroes, who escape catastrophic destruction seemingly unscathed, reaffirms the disposable nature of the entertainment provided. It is a film that understands the surface elements of the action genre: the fast cars, the exotic locales, the impressive fight choreography, but fails to weave them into a compelling emotional tapestry, ultimately serving as a serviceable but hollow revival. The narrative framing devices employed in Return of Xander Cage often feel more like justifications for its existence than organic plot developments. Consider the nature of the threat: an extremist group seeking to distribute weaponized bioweapons via stolen satellites. This level of global, existential peril traditionally demands a protagonist operating with extreme focus and moral clarity. Xander Cage, however, is presented as someone who only returns because the alternative is watching his former mentor and surrogate father figure, Augustus Gibbons, potentially be implicated. Yet the film spends surprisingly little time dwelling on this initial motivation. Instead, it quickly transitions into assembling the new xXx team, which functions more like a superhero roster reveal than a necessary convergence of specialized skills. The dynamic between Xander and Xiang, while visually engaging thanks to Yen's presence, suffers from the script's inability to fully commit to either genuine animosity or deep camaraderie until the final moments. Xiang is positioned as the ideological opposite, a disciplined, almost philosophical operative utilizing precise, lethal force, but the film often defaults to having them simply trade blows until the plot necessitates cooperation. Yen's character arc, centered on protecting his sister and reclaiming his honor, carries an emotional resonance largely absent from Cage's own quest, which primarily revolves around maintaining his identity as the ultimate adrenaline junkie. It's as if the writers understood that Yen needed a stronger emotional anchor to anchor the film's credibility, while Diesel was given license to simply be Xander Cage in the way the current market demands: bigger, louder, and more globally recognized. Deepika Padukone's Jane Zhang, while embodying intelligence and capability, is largely relegated to the role of the mission coordinator, the necessary anchor to reality that Xander continuously strains against. Her scenes often involve exposition delivered in high-tech environments, a visual cue signaling competency that doesn't translate into meaningful interpersonal conflict with Cage. This contrasts sharply with the initial films where the government handlers often viewed Cage with palpable suspicion and outright disdain. Here, that tension has been replaced by a comfortable, if slightly strained, professional partnership. This smoothing over of the anti-establishment edge is crucial to understanding the film's diluted impact. The danger of Xander Cage was always that he couldn't be controlled. In this installment, he is merely deployed, suggesting the very system he once defied has successfully co-opted and monetized his rebellious spirit. Furthermore, the visual language surrounding the supporting cast highlights their secondary status. While Rose's Wolf is proficient with firearms and tactical maneuvers, her few attempts at emotional connection feel forced, serving only to momentarily interrupt the action flow. McCann's Tennyson, despite his imposing stature, is entirely defined by his technology, existing solely to provide necessary plot enablement, such as hacking encrypted servers or piloting specialized vehicles. They are functional pieces designed to fill the gaps in Cage's skill set, lacking the distinct, often abrasive personalities that made the original team memorable, even if they were thinly sketched. The result is an ensemble that feels assembled for demographic appeal rather than narrative synergy, a glossy package of international action tropes that prioritizes visual diversity over genuine character investment. The entire production is a testament to the modern action blockbuster's reliance on spectacle as a substitute for sustained narrative tension. The film's climax, set against the backdrop of a heavily fortified, undisclosed island fortress, perfectly encapsulates its core conflict, style triumphing over substance to an almost absurd degree. The infiltration sequence itself is a masterclass in visual overstimulation, employing every trope available in the modern action playbook. Xander Cage utilizes a specialized, presumably government-funded vehicle, a high-tech submarine that transforms into a motorcycle capable of navigating shallow water. A gadget so overtly unrealistic, it demands the audience completely suspend disbelief, which, at this point in the film, is an easy concession. This relentless pursuit of bigger stunt work often overshadows the actual tactical planning that the narrative pretends to value. When characters like Xiang or Wolf execute feats of marksmanship or parkour, the action is framed with a slight reverence for physical discipline. When Xander performs a feat, it is presented with overwhelming pyrotechnics and editing designed to mask any perceived lack of grounded reality. This dichotomy speaks volumes about the intended audience experience. The film seems split between honoring the legacy of high-octane, albeit grounded, practical stunts of the early 2000s, and succumbing entirely to the weightless, CGI-heavy environment of contemporary tentpole franchises. Diesel's enduring appeal rests on his ability to project sincerity, even when delivering lines about friendship while hanging off a plane. However, here, that sincerity is strained by the sheer scale of the required spectacle. The destruction wrought throughout the final battle is breathtaking in its scope. Helicopters crashing, entire structures disintegrating, Yet because every protagonist survives these events without even a visible scratch, the stakes dissolve entirely. We are left with aesthetic carnage devoid of emotional impact. The resolution, wherein the immediate threat is neutralized, and the team secures a victory that instantly propels them back into an ambiguous readiness for future missions, feels perfunctory. There is no lingering sense of cost or moral complexity. Xander Cage, having faced down an international terrorist plot, returns to his comfortable state of operational readiness, hinting at the establishment's complete acceptance, and perhaps even adoration, of his brand of vigilantism. This transformation from the government's necessary evil to its preferred instrument completes the domestication of the character. The rebellion is over. The franchise is now fully aligned with the corporate machinery that funds its global reach. While the film successfully re-established the xXx brand in the action market, it did so by sacrificing the very anti-establishment friction that gave the original iteration its initial, albeit brief, spark. It is loud, fast, and ultimately forgettable, serving primarily as a vehicle to showcase Vin Diesel's continued international box office viability in a formulaic yet visually ambitious package. The lingering sentiment after the credits roll is one of sensory overload without lasting resonance, a cinematic sugar rush that leaves one hungry for something more substantial. The film's commitment to perpetual motion means that emotional decompression is never truly afforded. Even in the brief moments intended for reflection, such as Xander's quiet acknowledgement of his past life or his shared glances with Jane Zhang, the mood is immediately superseded by the need to set up the next set piece. This prioritization suggests a studio mandate. Keep the audience's eyes darting, lest they notice the thematic hollowness. What is particularly noticeable is the missed opportunity to explore the nuanced psychological toll that operating perpetually outside the law, even for noble reasons, must take on these supposed elite operatives. Cage, in theory, should exhibit a level of detachment, or perhaps a deep-seated weariness, from constantly risking his life for shifting governmental priorities. Instead, Diesel plays him with an almost contented certainty. This isn't the haunted survivor of the espionage world. It's the celebrity action star enjoying his well-deserved victory lap. Compare this to Diesel's earlier work in other franchises, where even in moments of triumph, a shadow of consequence lingered. Here, the shadow is entirely absent, replaced by polished chrome and sunny skies. The international villains, while providing the necessary visual diversity for global marketing, ultimately lack the visceral menace that a truly compelling antagonist requires. Talon fades into the background, a casualty of a plot that spreads its focus too thin across too many global locations and too many ensemble members. When the true villain is so easily dispatched after a flurry of choreographed violence, the preceding global crisis feels artificially inflated. There's no real fear that this threat will fundamentally alter the world the heroes inhabit. It will simply be wiped clean by the next massive explosion, ready for the sequel. The final impression left by Return of Xander Cage is that it functions successfully as a portfolio piece for Vin Diesel's global brand, demonstrating his capacity to anchor a franchise built on multicultural appeal and extreme spectacle. It meticulously checks the boxes for modern action cinema. Diverse cast, unbelievable stunts, globe-trotting locations, and technologically impossible espionage. Yet, in its eagerness to be everything to everyone, it ultimately settles on being nothing memorable to anyone. The return of Xander Cage was less a triumphant homecoming and more a necessary calibration, repositioning the character from a niche action icon into a recognizable, easily consumable component of a larger, interconnected cinematic universe, trading rebellious spirit for market synergy. The very ethos of the film seems to suggest that authenticity in action sequences is secondary to sheer volume and geographic diversity. The transitions between locations, from the dense jungles of South America to the stark industrial landscapes of Russia or East Asia, are jarring, serving only to reset the visual palette rather than deepen the narrative immersion. Each locale feels like a prepackaged stage set, designed for a specific type of stunt that can be easily marketed in a trailer. This relentless globetrotting prevents any single setting from achieving atmospheric weight. We never feel the biting cold of the Russian mountains or the suffocating humidity of the jungle. These places are merely backdrops for the next vehicular ballet. This lack of environment immersion is intrinsically linked to the film's muted emotional landscape. When Cage and his team engage in combat, particularly in the large-scale assaults, the camera seems deliberately positioned to obscure the faces and reactions of the collateral forces, the nameless security guards or military personnel being subdued. This serves two functions. It keeps the focus squarely on the charismatic leads, and it sanitizes the violence. The fight scenes, particularly those featuring Rose's wolf, are efficient, almost clinical executions of tactical maneuvers. There is no visible strain, no moment of doubt etched onto their faces, suggesting that they view this life-or-death conflict with the same detachment one might approach a highly technical training exercise. Its action filtered through a layer of glossy perfection, rendering the danger inert. Even the supposed moment of shared reflection between Xander and Xiang, following their intense conflict, feels dramatically underserved. After a prolonged, well-choreographed brawl that should leave both men physically and mentally drained, they transition almost instantly to cooperative strategizing. This narrative expediency denies the audience the payoff of genuine reconciliation forged through shared hardship. Instead, it's a transactional alliance cemented by mutual necessity, reflecting a screenplay more concerned with moving assets into position for the finale than exploring the messy aftermath of intense personal rivalry. Donnie Yen, with his expressive eyes and economical movements, hints at the emotional depth that was jettisoned in favor of speed. One senses the potential for a compelling thematic duel, the master of precise control versus the master of chaotic improvisation, but this duel is too often interrupted by explosive distractions. Ultimately, the film succeeds only as a demonstration of scale, not as storytelling. It functions as a proof of concept that Vin Diesel, even years after the character's initial run, can still command attention when backed by an enormous budget and a mandate for visual escalation. However, by doubling down on the global scale and sacrificing the character's foundational anti-establishment spirit, Return of Xander Cage ensures that while Xander Cage may have returned to the screen, the rebellious heart that once defined him remains conspicuously absent, replaced by a commercially viable, fully sanctioned government asset. The calculated assembly of the new xXx team serves as the most overt example of the film's prioritization of demographic reach over organic character necessity. Xander Cage is no longer recruiting misfits who challenge authority. He is curating a highly specialized, marketable roster for the newly rebranded and officially sanctioned program. Darius Stone, played by Michael Bisset, is reintroduced with minimal fanfare, his military background slotted neatly into the heavy weapons category. His presence feels less like a narrative requirement stemming from the events of the previous sequel, and more like a required nod to franchise continuity, a familiar face in a sea of new global talent. He represents the established, conventional military wing that Cage's extreme methods must theoretically complement. Then there is Tennyson Ten Roach, portrayed by Rory McCann. McCann, whose career is often marked by characters possessing a gruff, imposing physicality. Think of his memorable, often brooding roles, is here confined largely to the technological periphery. Ten is the necessary exposition machine, the operator of drones and satellite feeds, whose dialogue consists mostly of technical readouts and tactical advisories. This underutilization of an actor with McCann's inherent gravitas suggests a template approach. If the team needs tech support, you plug in a large, recognizable actor and assign him a laptop. The emotional landscape surrounding Ten is virtually non-existent. He exists only to solve technical hurdles, stripping him of the potential for the kind of world weariness that someone operating in constant surveillance might develop. The most telling character dynamic, or lack thereof, involves the relationship between Xander and the newly introduced field agents, particularly Ruby Rose's Wolf. Wolf is the archetype of the icy, hyper-competent operative, a character type that has become increasingly common in action cinema to denote serious professionalism. Her interactions with Cage are almost devoid of the playful friction or mutual distrust that defined the early chemistry in the original xXx. Where Cage once thrived on testing boundaries, Wolf seems programmed to respect the mission parameters, making her a functional counterpart but a poor source of dramatic tension for Cage's character. She is a reflection of the refined, controlled world that has absorbed Xander, mirroring the film's theme of domestication rather than challenging it with true anarchy. The film requires the team to function as a perfectly oiled machine from the moment they assemble, eliminating the necessary friction and mistrust that makes the formation of an unlikely alliance inherently dramatic. It's a team built for immediate effectiveness, not for compelling audience attachment. The entire aesthetic of the film screams calculated international appeal, an attempt to synthesize the marketable components of various global action markets into one cohesive, if somewhat disjointed, product. This is most evident in the costuming and environment design, which shift rapidly to cater to whichever continent the plot demands next. Xander Cage's wardrobe, for instance, transitions from the rugged, vaguely bohemian gear of his exile to sleek, black tactical wear that makes him visually indistinguishable from the professional operatives he is supposed to be leading. This visual conformity suggests an integration into the very system he was presumed to have rejected. He is no longer the outsider. He is the premium, customized product of the intelligence apparatus. The action choreography itself, while technically impressive in its scope, the aforementioned motorcycle, launching into orbit sequence being the prime, absurd example, suffers from a fundamental lack of visceral consequence. When Xander is involved in close-quarters combat, the camera often employs a shaky, rapid-fire style that keeps the viewer at arm's length from the actual impact of blows. This technique, common in action films trying to mask a lack of sustained, focused choreography, serves to emphasize speed over connection. Contrast this sharply with the moments dedicated to Donnie Yen's Chiang. When Yen moves, the frame settles, the editing relaxes, and the viewer is allowed to appreciate the precision of his strikes and blocks. This deliberate contrast suggests a directorial awareness of what constitutes truly engaging fight work, yet this awareness is selectively applied, primarily to elevate the non-diesel characters. Chiang's discipline is visually rewarded, while Cage's improvised recklessness is rewarded with flashing lights and sound effects. Furthermore, the handling of the romantic subplot, primarily involving Deepika Padukone's Jane Zhang, feels strangely muted given the high-stakes environment. Their chemistry, while pleasant, lacks the smoldering tension or genuine vulnerability necessary to anchor the audience during the massive set pieces. Zhang is positioned as the competent, trustworthy anchor of the newly reinstated xXx program, a bureaucratic evolution that Xander must tolerate. There is a palpable lack of the dangerous edge that characterized the relationships in the first film, where the alliance was born of mutual necessity under duress, often tinged with mutual suspicion. Here, everyone trusts Xander almost immediately, because he has returned specifically to do a job for them. This immediate trust removes the inherent conflict from the team dynamic, leaving only external obstacles, which the film resolves with increasingly fantastical gadgetry. The emotional depth required to sell the global threat is simply not invested in the protagonist's personal connections. They are too busy being cool and efficient, making the entire endeavor feel emotionally sterile despite the visual fireworks. The inherent flaw in the film's structure lies in its attempt to retrofit the subversive energy of the early 2000s action movie onto the contemporary, highly polished, and interconnected cinematic universe model. The original xXx thrived on its outsider status, a government entity forced to utilize an agent who actively despised rules. This 2017 iteration sees Xander Cage not as an unwilling participant, but as a welcomed, almost celebrated prodigal son, returning to lead the very structure he once mocked. This acceptance robs the character of his essential friction. When he executes a stunt that defies physics, the audience's reaction is intended to be admiration for his established brand, rather than awe mixed with the thrilling anticipation of his inevitable confrontation with his handlers. Vin Diesel, whose career has become synonymous with themes of extended, often familial teams succeeding through impossible odds, plays Cage with a paternalistic confidence. His performance emphasizes loyalty and protection, traits that were secondary to pure, adrenaline-fueled self-interest in the first installment. This thematic shift caters to the established sensibility of the diesel blockbuster market, but it fundamentally alters Xander Cage. The character is now less a dangerous instrument and more a highly specialized contractor operating within an established, if secretive, framework. This lack of internal struggle against authority makes the external conflicts feel less urgent, because the team is fundamentally unified from the outset. The supporting cast continues to feel like a collection of required roles rather than integrated personalities. Ruby Rose's Adele Wolfe functions as the embodiment of ruthless efficiency, her moments of action sharp and impactful, yet her dialogue scenes serve only to reiterate mission parameters. She is a precision tool in a film that otherwise celebrates chaotic spectacle. Her stoicism is a performance choice that, while aesthetically cool, prevents any meaningful emotional investment from the audience. We observe her competence, but never feel her stakes beyond the immediate mission objective. Similarly, the relationship between Xander and Jane Zhang, while providing an adult, stable connection, lacks the necessary spark of danger or ideological clash. Deepika Padukone brings grace and seriousness to Zhang's role, portraying a woman who has taken the reins of a damaged program and is striving for legitimacy. However, the screenplay rarely allows Xander to truly test her patience or her authority in a way that feels genuinely threatening to the mission. Their interactions are polite, professional, and ultimately uneventful, failing to generate the emotional currents that could have added gravity to the absurdly large-scale threats they face. The film seems wary of allowing its charismatic leads to engage in sustained interpersonal conflict, preferring instead the immediate gratification of spectacular action sequences where everyone is functionally on the same page, albeit performing different skill sets. This commitment to frictionless execution leaves the narrative feeling oddly smooth and ultimately weightless. The film's climax, culminating in the near-orbital deployment of the satellite weapon, utilizes a visual language that feels entirely derivative of contemporary sci-fi action rather than the grounded, extreme sports focus of the franchise's inception. The sheer scale of the threat, weaponized satellites, is so gargantuan that it renders the personal skill sets of the team members almost irrelevant. When Cage and Xiang must infiltrate the heavily armored carrier ship, their individual talents are subsumed by the overwhelming need for massive firepower and technological intervention. The sequences rely heavily on choreographed explosions and physics-defying acrobatics, most notably Xander Cage driving a specialized motorcycle off a massive crane into the sea to board the vessel. This stunt is visually arresting, yes, but it crosses the line from impressive practical stunt work into pure, unadulterated digital fantasy, signaling a complete surrender to the visual expectations set by Diesel's other, more fantastical cinematic ventures. This visual escalation comes at the direct expense of character intimacy. The audience is bombarded with massive set pieces designed to impress the global market, but rarely are we given a moment to sit with the characters to process the monumental risks they are taking. When Xiang sacrifices his immediate tactical advantage to ensure Cage's success, this crucial moment of ideological convergence and mutual respect feels rushed, a necessary beat to tick off before the final confrontation begins. Donnie Yen imbues the scene with quiet nobility, making the audience feel the weight of Xiang's decision, Yet the immediate aftermath devolves into another flurry of gunfire and explosions, effectively erasing the emotional impact of his choice. It's as if the editor feared that a moment of silence or introspection would cause the audience to lose interest and demand more visual stimulation. The final confrontation with the primary antagonist, Talon, is anticlimactic to a degree that borders on insulting to the preceding build-up. Nina Dobrev's character is dispatched with surprising swiftness once the final layer of security is breached, reinforcing the notion that the true boss battle in this film is never against a person, but against the elaborate technological defenses of the fortress itself. The villains exist only as catalysts for spectacle, not as compelling ideological foils. Once the MacGuffin, the satellite control codes, is secured, the film rapidly wraps up its loose ends, with Xander Cage standing triumphant amidst the wreckage, his status as the world's premier operative fully reaffirmed, yet utterly unchanged in spirit. The conclusion is less a victory earned through struggle, and more a product launch concluded successfully, paving the way for inevitable, equally large-scale future engagements. The film leaves the viewer with the distinct feeling of having watched a very expensive, extremely fast promotional reel for the xXx brand reboot, rather than a self-contained, satisfying action narrative. The film's ultimate resolution speaks volumes about the contemporary state of action franchises: complete narrative reset and hero restoration without any lasting scars. Xander Cage emerges from the apocalyptic climax not just alive, but seemingly improved, his global reputation solidified. This manufactured immunity is the final nail in the coffin for the character's edge. In earlier eras of action cinema, a protagonist surviving such massive, technologically intricate assaults would carry visible emotional and physical evidence of the ordeal. Here, the narrative cleanses all negative consequences, ensuring that the brand remains pristine for the next iteration. This lack of consequence breeds apathy. If failure or death are entirely off the table, the viewer's engagement wanes, reduced to passively observing expensive choreography. Furthermore, the reintroduction of the xXx program under Jane Zhang's leadership formalizes the character's shift from a necessary rogue element to a valuable, state-sanctioned asset. This narrative choice mirrors the broader trajectory of many action stars who transition from playing defiant underdogs to becoming pillars of the establishment they once fought. Zhang, despite Deepika Padukone's composed performance, personifies this institutional capture. She provides the organizational backbone that allows Xander's chaos to be effective rather than destructive. But in doing so, she strips away the inherent drama of the anti-establishment hero operating outside the lines. The excitement derived from watching Xander evade his own handlers is replaced by the dull satisfaction of watching him perfectly execute orders handed down through his own resurrected division. Even the final fleeting moments, which suggest a future where Cage and his team continue their boundary-pushing work, feel more like contractual obligations for a sequel than earned narrative beats. The chemistry between the ensemble, built so swiftly on specialized skills rather than shared trauma, remains superficial. While the film delivers on its promise of extreme action, providing international spectacle and high-octane vehicular mayhem, it fails to deliver on the more subtle promise of character resurgence. Xander Cage returns, but the raw, unpolished energy that made him noteworthy has been buffed away, leaving behind a highly functional, internationally palatable, but ultimately sterile action artifact. It is an entertainment product calibrated for maximum immediate impact, designed to be consumed quickly and forgotten upon the arrival of the next big spectacle. The final tableau of Xander Cage, standing on a sun-drenched locale, perhaps overseeing a new potential mission or simply enjoying the spoils of his victory, is the ultimate symbol of the film's thematic capitulation. He is surrounded by his perfectly diverse, perfectly competent team, a living embodiment of focus group-tested appeal, yet the scene feels utterly hollow. There is no lingering glance toward the shadows, no sense of the world having been irrevocably altered by the conflict. Instead, the atmosphere is one of casual readiness, akin to a corporate retreat that happens to involve military hardware. This manufactured serenity undermines every explosion and every near-death experience that preceded it. The character of Xander Cage in this final iteration embodies the safe sequel dilemma. He is too big to fail, and therefore incapable of facing genuine jeopardy. Diesel projects an amiable confidence, a man entirely comfortable in his role as a global action icon. But this very comfort precludes the dramatic tension derived from vulnerability. The audience is asked to invest in the spectacle of his survival, rather than the struggle for it. When he exchanges a knowing look with any member of his team, be it the steady professionalism of Jang or the stoic presence of Wolf, it's a look of shared competence, not shared sacrifice. They are colleagues, not comrades forged in fire. Donnie Yen's Xiang, the character who brought the most weight and emotional grounding to the proceedings, is left to fade out somewhat awkwardly, his redemption arc completed through necessary, albeit sidelined, heroism. His final moments feel less like the conclusion of a tragic anti-hero's journey, and more like a guest star, politely exiting the stage after delivering his required action quota. His quiet dignity, which so effectively cut through the manufactured noise surrounding Cage, vanishes too quickly, leaving the audience grasping for the only thread of authentic drama the film offered. Ultimately, Return of Xander Cage functions less as a genuine revival and more as a highly expensive, multinational marketing campaign for the idea of Xander Cage in the modern blockbuster landscape. It understands the vocabulary of action, the exotic locales, the impossible stunts, the diverse cast, but it has forgotten the grammar of compelling storytelling, which requires stakes, consequence, and a protagonist who feels like they might actually lose something important. The film concludes not with a bang of narrative resonance, but with a polished corporate shimmer, promising more of the same frictionless, consequence-free adrenaline rides in the future. The film's final reliance on establishing the potential for future installments feels like a deliberate evasion of concluding the current one with any meaningful emotional closure. The very last sequence, often involving the team convening in their state-of-the-art, undisclosed headquarters, a space that feels more like a futuristic showroom than a covert operational base, is designed purely for sequel baiting. The camera lingers on the team members, each poised and ready, suggesting an endless series of escalating global crises that will require their immediate, unparalleled intervention. This relentless focus on brand extension overshadows any attempt to analyze the impact of the current crisis on the individuals involved. Consider the implied psychological aftermath for Xander Cage. He has just neutralized a plot that could have caused mass death via bioweaponry, an event that, in any grounded narrative, would leave even the most hardened operative wrestling with trauma, sleepless nights, or profound moral reckoning about the violence they enacted. Instead, Xander is portrayed as invigorated, his eyes bright with the thrill of having successfully executed an impossible task. Vin Diesel plays this victorious state with a level of unshakable contentment that borders on performance apathy. There's no grit remaining. The rough edges that once made him captivatingly rebellious have been sanded down until he's smooth enough to slide seamlessly into any global marketing campaign. He is, effectively, the ultimate self-aware brand asset. This sanitized resolution is further cemented by the character of Xiang's departure. While his alliance with Cage was born of necessity, his final moments should carry the weight of a complicated brotherhood forged under fire. Instead, his exit is clean, almost perfunctory, a quiet nod confirming that the mission succeeded, and his personal objectives, protecting his sister, which offered the film its scant emotional bedrock, are met. Donnie Yen's performance deserved a more resonant farewell, perhaps a moment where he chooses his path, reintegration into a shadowy order or true retirement, but the script is too impatient to let that decision breathe. Xiang is utilized perfectly as a foil and a spectacular action partner, but once his utility wanes in the endgame, he is smoothly phased out, leaving Xander Cage as the sole, unchallengeable nucleus of the franchise. The entire production architecture screams of modern studio calculation. Secure the legacy IP, refresh the cast with international appeal, maximize CGI spectacle to compete with cinematic universes, and ensure the narrative threads are deliberately left untied for the inevitable franchise continuation. Return of Xander Cage succeeds technically as a high-budget exercise in action tropes, but it fails fundamentally as drama. It trades the thrilling ambiguity of the original, where the hero operated in moral gray zones, for the comfortable certainty of a globally approved, morally unambiguous, and utterly consequence-free superhero team. The rebellion is officially over. Long live the profitable, sanitized iteration of the Extreme Operative. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Q-Man channel. Please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. Today, we will be discussing the movie xXx Return of Xander Cage 2017. The film kicks off with a jaw-dropping sequence, a highly intense, almost reckless skydiving stunt orchestrated by none other than Xander Cage himself. This isn't just some casual freefall. It's a deliberate provocation, a middle finger to the established order, showcasing the kind of adrenaline junkie individualism that made him a legend in the first place. Xander, who had supposedly retired and was living a quiet life in the Dominican Republic, teaching extreme sports to the local community, is quickly pulled back into the fray. The catalyst for his return is a covert mission concerning a dangerous satellite weapon known as Pandora's Box. This device, capable of causing catastrophic global disruption by hacking into military satellites, falls into the wrong hands when it's stolen by a highly skilled operative named Shang, a former associate of Xander's, driven by his own sense of justice and perhaps a bit of resentment toward the global powers that shunned him. Jane Zhang, a sharp, ambitious operative from the NSA, realizes that the only people capable of tracking down Xiang and neutralizing Pandora's Box are those operating outside the conventional lines of the law and military protocol. People like Xander Cage. She finds him, not through official channels, but by seeking him out in his remote paradise. Xander, initially hesitant, agrees to come back, but on his terms, demanding complete autonomy. This immediately sets the tone. He's not a soldier taking orders. He's a specialist being recruited. Xander assembles his own team, a collection of global misfits whose talents mirror his own eclectic approach to espionage. There's Tennyson, a tech wizard whose specialty lies in hacking and digital infiltration. Hawk, a former military sharpshooter with a knack for precision and a somewhat volatile temperament. And Adele Wolf, a tough, uncompromising operative whose background suggests intense special forces training, adding a necessary dose of grit to the group. Their dynamic is immediately contentious, as they represent different worlds. Xander's street-smart, improvisational style clashes with the more rigid, high-level training of someone like Wolf. The pursuit takes them across continents, from the bustling streets of Shanghai to the snowy peaks of remote mountains. Xiang and his crew are equally capable, presenting formidable opposition. The action sequences are less about precise military maneuvers and more about spectacular, physics-defying stunts. Think high-speed chases involving motorcycles weaving through dense urban traffic and snowboarding down mountainsides while under heavy fire. This level of spectacle is Xander's signature.